Okay. We were discussing the sugya of Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, and coming from Amud Beis on Amud Aleph, at the end of the pasuk of Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, it says Lahaktir Ishay Lashem. And the Gemara tells us that that's telling us that even to do an avodah that's not ma'akav kapara, like Haktares, Emurim, and Evorim, and Chalovim, even for that, the Kohanim have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. So now we're on the second line of Daf Chaf Amud Aleph. Zok the Heilige Gemara. Ki also Rav Dimi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. When Rav Dimi came, he told us over in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that boy Ilfa. Ilfa had a shayla. Lediv Raya Omer Ein Linamoy Elis B'Kiddush Yodayim V'Raglayim. According to Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon, we had yesterday a machlokes. If the Kiddush Yodayim V'Raglayim expire by Alois HaShachar, we know if you have a korban that's Kedushas Aguf and it's left overnight, like the Imurim, the moment Alois HaShachar comes, it's Pasul Belina. It expires. So we want to know, do you say the same thing, Lagabi Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? According to Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim on day one, and he was working straight through the night to day two, does he have to do another Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon said you don't need to, and Rebbe said you do need to. So Zokt Ulfa, according to Rabbi Eliezer bar Shimon, that Ein Lina Moy Elos B'Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, and the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim does not expire, and you don't need to do another Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim the next morning. What about the water in the kiyar itself? Now the kiyar had a din of a kleishares. The water in the kiyar was in the kleishares. Do you say that the water in the kiyar will become posel belino? We've already said that the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim itself does not expire. But how about the water inside the kiyar? Make kiyar mao sheyifsu. Mi amrin, do you say hani lamai? What is the whole purpose of this water? The Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Well, Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim gufayu lo posel behulina. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon holds that the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim doesn't expire, so Alois HaShachar doesn't impact it. So maybe huadin the mayim in the kiyar shouldn't be impacted by the Alois HaShachar. Oidilma kivan the Kaddish lahu b'chlisharis mifsali. It's in the klisharis. It's no different than any other carbon, as Rashi says. Kivan the Kaddish b'chlisharis ifsalu the loidami lekiddush yadayim. You can't say just because by kiddush yadayim it doesn't expire. You know why it doesn't expire? Shamayim nigvu. The water on the hands of the kohen who did the kiddush yadayim v'raglayim has already dried out. Ve'ein lina al mi lochel. There is no place for the psul lina to be chal. But if there's water in the kiyar, that's something that the psul lina could be chal upon. Therefore, according to Rabbi Eliezer bar Shimon, we want to know if there will be a psulina. According to Rebbe, there for sure will be a psulina. Question is, according to Rabbi Eliezer bar Shimon. So Kiyazer Rabban Omar B'Yirmi Omar B'Ami Omar B'Yochanan Hadar Pasha Ilfa. Ilfa cleared the shaila, and then he puts Pasha the shaila, and he said K'machloikis bezu kach machloikis bezu. The same Rabbi Eliezer bar Shimon says that there's no psulina on the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, and you don't have to do Kiddush V'Raglayim again in the morning. So too the water in the kiyar does not have that psul. Amar the fun of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna told him, Rebbe, Ata Omer Kain, Rabbi Yirmiyah, are you saying b'pashtus that the Shiloh was mispashit? How could it be? Elohachi Omer Rab Ami, the Bach changed it to Rab Ami. Elohachi Omer Rab Ami, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Mishmeida Ilfa. Rab Ami said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Ilfa, Kiyar, Shaloi Shiku Mi Ba'erev. What if you have a kiyar that was full of water? Normally, in order so that it shouldn't become possibilina, they would lower it down into the river underneath the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore it wouldn't become solblina because it would be in the river. What if they didn't do that? So you have the kiyar sitting up on the ground, and evening came, and now it's nighttime. The halacha is mekadesh mimenu lavodas laila. If somebody wants to do avodah at night, a kohen comes in for the night shift to be makter the chalavim and the imurim of that day, he could use that kiyar and make Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim with it. But ulamacher einim mekadesh. Tomorrow morning, he's not Mekadosh. And Ulamachar in the Mekadosh, this comment, it's a suffix what this means. Vavinamba, we had a Shaila. Do we say Lamachar Eina Mekadosh? Meaning, L'tzarech Lik Dusha. Meaning, in the morning he doesn't have to make Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. You know why? Because Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon says that his Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim that he did at night will not expire. Is that what it means? So it's not commenting on the water. It's just saying once the Kohen does Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim by the night, it lasts forever until he leaves the Beis HaMikdash. Maybe L'machar in Mekadosh means if Vada it needs a Kohen in the morning, that Kohen in the morning will need Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Nervos, the water in the kiyar he can't use because L'machar in the Mekadosh tomorrow morning he can no longer use the water in this kiyar because it's possibly no. Idilma if Silubelina. And there we weren't able to be pasha the shaila, which is exactly this shaila is the water possibilina. Umarka pasha like mishfit. And you're telling me that we were pasha the shaila? You see clearly that they weren't able to be pasha the shaila. So therefore, Zok Gemara Tashma gonna have to bring a raya from a brisa. Because clearly, Ilfa, we weren't sure what Ilfa's halacha was. So how could you tell me that Ilfa was Poshet to Shai? So Zok to Gemara Toshma. Ben Ketin was a Yid who donated to the Beis HaMikdash something that was of great value that helped the process there. And what he did was he made a kiyar with Shnei Moser Dat, also Shnei Moser Dat Lakir. He made the kiyar should have 12 spigots so that 12 kohanim simultaneously can do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. What was the benefit of that? Zokt Rashi, because the amount of kohanim that were needed to be makrif, the entire Korban Tomid Shel Shachar was 12 kohanim. So this way the entire Tomid crew would be able to simultaneously make Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Another thing he did is Afu also Muchani Lakiyar Shalayu Meimav Nifsolim Belim. He also created a pulley system. Now, in order to stop the water in the kiyar from becoming possible, they would have to lower it into the river and then raise it back up. This kiyar weighed about a minimum of 500 pounds, very difficult to raise out of the water. So he created a hoist system with pulleys that would allow them to be able to easily raise it up. Why did he do that? So that it would be easy for them to avoid the psolina in the water of the kiyar. So we have a brisa that's saying black and white that there was a psolina on the water in the kiyar. Now, all we need to prove now is that who's talking here? Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon. According to Rabbi, we know the water is a psolina. Now we need to prove that this brisa, the author of this brisa is Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon. So Zokkumar my love, Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon. Let's say that the author of this brisa is Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon, and then you have a raya that Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon holds that the water becomes possibilina. Zokkumar loy, Rabbi, maybe it's Rebbe, and therefore you don't have a raya what Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon holds. Zok to Gemara about the ratio Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, the ratio which we are soon going to introduce is clearly going according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon. So Pashtus, the whole brisa has the one author, and if we're able to prove that another part of this brisa, its author was Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, we can make a fair assumption that this whole brisa is Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, even the part of the brisa that states that there is a psolina in the water of the kiyar. So therefore, say Benami Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon. Where do you see the ratio is authored by Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon? The Katani ratio, the ratio the Mishnah talks about a completely different halacha, nothing to do with lina, nothing to do with kiyar. It has to do with the positioning of the kohen and the animal, the parachatos that they brought on Yom Kippur. So before we can learn this sugya, we have to have a hakdama. There were many zones in the Beis HaMikdash. And we know, we say it every day in the Ezel Mekodim, that any chatos, which is kachim, the shechita has to be on the tzofan side of the Mizbeach. And there's a three-way machlokes. Where is this zone that you're allowed to shecht a chatos in? So let's take a virtual tour through the Beis HaMikdash. Most of you have a diagram in your Gemara. So I'm walking into the front door of the Azara, of the Ezra's Noshim. My back is towards the east, which would be Har HaZeisim, and I'm facing the west. I walk into the center front gates of the Ezras Noshim. The Ezras Noshim is not relevant to this discussion. I walk straight due west to get to the next set of doors, which takes me into the Azara where the Mizbeach was. When I enter those doors, for the first 22 Amis, we split them into 11 and 11. So I'm walking into the door of the Ezras Kohanim, so to speak. For the first 11 Amis, that was called the Ezras Yisrael. That's where anyone from Yisrael could stand there. Then the next 11 Amis, only the Kohanim were allowed to be in. And then you hit the Mizbeach. The Mizbeach was a big 32 Amma by 32 Amma cube. Now, we know that anything to the right of the Mizbeach would be the north. Anything to the left of the Mizbeach would be the south. So there would be a zone. So the first zone we discussed was the 22 Amis, the 11 and the 11. The next zone I want to discuss is the area immediately to the north, or from my perspective, to the right of the Mizbeach, which was 32 Amis wide. That there's a shaila exactly how long it was. In other words, how much space there was between the north wall of the Mizbeach and the north wall of the Azara. But in that range, that's literally due north of the Mizbeach. So that zone, everybody agrees, you can check the Chatas in, because that's mamish due north. That's Tzvaynish al Mizbeach. You can't have more Tzvaynish al Mizbeach than that. And then after the Mizbeach, there's another stretch of open land until you hit the Ulam. That's referred to as Bein HaUlam LeMizbeach, the real estate that's between the Ulam and the Mizbeach. So everybody holds that the zone right in front of the Mizbeach, or immediately to the right, or to the north of the Mizbeach, that clearly is Tzafay. That's a place where you can check the Kachim, Chatas. Bein HaUlam LeMizbeach. What about that same north side, but not right opposite the Mizbeach, further west of the Mizbeach, in the space between the Ulam and the Mizbeach? Are you allowed to shecht in that zone? We're going to see Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shimon holds that zone is also kosher for shechita. But anything to the east of the Mizbeach, like those 22 Amis we were talking about earlier, there you can't shecht. And then we have the shita of Rebbe, who holds that you could even shecht in the first 22 Amis, of course, only on the right side, only on the north side of the Mizbeach, but that's even to the west of the to the east of the Mizbeach. Right when you walk in, those first 22 Amis, which are to the east of the Mizbeach, the north half of the Azara of that area is also a zone that you can shecht, the Chatasim. So we have three zones. There's the zone that's right north of the Mizbeach, that everybody holds. So fine, you can check there. Then we have Rabbi Eliezer Shimon, who adds to that zone the zone Bein HaUlam and the Mizbeach, but of course the north side, the right side. And then Rebbe, who's the most liberal, says you could even shecht on the east side of the Mizbeach in those 22 Amis on the north side. What everybody agrees you cannot shecht in is, what if I continue past the Ulam? Now, of course, the Ulam didn't fill up the whole Azara. You can get around the side. So what if you're on the side of the Ulam? If you're on the side of the Ulam, everybody agrees that's not called Tzafayna Shal Mizbeach. There you couldn't shecht. So now that we have these shittas, let's learn it inside. The Katani Reisha, it said in the Reisha, discussing the exact position of the Kohen and his ox that he shechted as the ox that he shechted on Yom Kippur. And it says as follows: Ba loy etzel par. The Kohen Gadol came to his par. Uparai hayoimed ben ulam ulam. His par was standing ben ulam ulam mizbeach. It wasn't due north of the mizbeach. It was in Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shimon's zone. It was ben ulam ulam mizbeach, but of course on the north side. Now roishay l'darim upanov roishay l'darim means it was facing the south, meaning its hindquarters was facing the north, its front was facing the south. So that means the animal was running north-south. Its backside faced the north, its front side faced the south, but its head, upanov l'mayriv. But the head of the animal turned sharply to the right to face the ulam. So the cow was standing with his head turned all the way to the right. That was the position of the cow. The kohen was facing, his back was facing the mizrach. So his back was facing the mizbech. He was being the ulam the mizbech. So his back was facing the mizbech. Upon the and his face was facing the ulam. So he was on the outer perimeter of the animal's neck, and that's where he said vidui. That's where he shechted. Now, according to the Shita that the only zone you could check in is immediately north of the Mizbeach, this can't be what happened because you couldn't check there. But according to Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, this is a perfect zone. But the Ulam Mizbeach is a place where you could check. So man shamet lei the Omer beinu Ulam Mizbeach tzafon, who holds that for the purposes of shechting the chatos on the tzafon side of the Mizbeach, it also extends to the area on the north side of Bein Ha'ulam Mizbeach. That's Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon. So it makes sense that the author of this brisa is Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, because based on the positioning of the animal that the brisa states, it fits in perfectly according to Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon. So we know that Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon is the author of this brisa, and then by extension we know he also said that there's a psalina on the water inside the kier. The Tanya we learned in the brisa is tzafon. And what is the tzafon part of the mizbeach? What's the zone in which you're allowed to shecht a carbon chatas? So the first shita is mikir mizbeach tzafoni, from the northern wall of the mizbeach yat koisel azar tzafoni, until the northern wall of the koisel. But only ukeneged kol ha-mizbeach kulay tzafon. Only those 32 amas that are right north of the mizbeach, that's the only zone in which you're allowed to shecht the chatas. This is the sheet of Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda. Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, who's our target, says Moshe, he adds, in addition to that area, it's also af beina ulam mizbeach. Rebbe adds even another zone. He's the most liberal. Af makam drisas raglei akahanim umakam drisas raglei Yisrael. Those 11 amas that you encounter as soon as you enter the Azara, the right side and north side, is also a place where one could shech a carbon chatos. Gewaltig. Aval, everybody agrees that min ha-chalifos ulefnim, along the side of the ulam, which we called chalifos, because in that little addition, because the ulam was actually wider than the hechel, so in that little area on either side, on the north, on the south, the right or the left, where the ulam is wider than the hechel, in those two areas there were cabinets where the kohanim stored their chalifs, their knives, their shchita knives. So there, for sure, parallel to the ulam, that for sure is not so finishal mizbeach. Everybody agrees you couldn't shech there. There are koil moedim shapos. So Zok Gemara, based on this three machlokes, it seems to indicate that it's Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon who's the author of this brisa. Correct, Gemara, who said it could be Rebbe as well, because according to Rebbe, just because he also allows you to shecht in those 22 amis, but he also agrees you can shecht ben ulam mizbeach. So maybe the author of the brisa is not Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, maybe it's Rebbe. As the Gemara says, but his bra, Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon ivaloi Rebbe, hashter Rebbe ad Rabbi Yosy b'Rabbi Yehuda moisef ad Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon loy moisef. Rebbe is not only adding an extra zone to Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda's restricted zone of immediately north of the mizbeach. He agrees with Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon that ben ulam mizbeach is also tzafon, but he's adding, in addition to those two zones, he's adding the third zone of the 22 amas when you enter the Azara on the right side. So therefore, maybe Rebbe is the author of this brisa. Zok the Gemara, I'll tell you how we know that it must be Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon. Because even though Rebbe agrees you could check there, but this brisa must be Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon. Anan hachi karmina. If you held that this brisa is Rebbe, then why would Rebbe say you have to shecht the ben ulam mizbeach? According to Rebbe, you should have been able to shecht it as soon as you walked into the Azara on the right side. Lukma b'makam drisas raglei kahanim u'b'makam drisas raglei Yisrael. Why did Rebbe say that that's where the Kohen Gadol can shecht and do the vidui and shecht his par? So therefore, since the brisa limited it to the area of ben ulam mizbeach, a more restricted area than what Rebbe allowed, it makes sense to say that the author of the brisa is Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon. Frankly, more Elamai, Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimoni. If it's Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, you can ask the same question. Why did he pick Badavka ben ulam mizbeach? Lukma mikir mizbeach tzafoni at koshel azar tzafoni. Why didn't he pick the zone that everybody agrees to, the zone that's immediately north of the mizbeach? Elamai lachlameimer. How are you going to explain why Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon said that we have to shech the animal ben ulam mizbeach? Because we want it to be as close as possible to the ulam, which is where the Kohen Gadol is running with the blood right after he shechs to spritz it. And we don't want that to run so far. He's working very hard that day. He has a busy day of work. We want to minimize the amount of amas he has to walk. So therefore, the Kohen Gadol, according to Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, even though he could have shechted the carbon further away, we're worried about the coin being tired, we make him shechted as close as possible. No, so say it's going according to Rebbe. And the reason why Rebbe said shechted and ulam l'mizbeach and not on the first 22 amis is the same reason. Also, the kohen gadol. So therefore, you don't have a raya that the author of the brisa is Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon. It's quite possible that the author of this brisa is Rebbe, and therefore we don't have any raya about what Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon holds in reference to the shaila of lina on the psulina on the water in the cure. The Gemara remains with the shaila. The Gemara is not pushing the shaila. So now we're going to move on to another shaila that the Gemara asks. We're going to have a series of shailas that the Gemara asks, and we're not going to be pushing not even one of them. All of the shailas are going to remain unresolved. So now let's talk about shaila number 2. Amr Rabbi Yochanan, Kidesh Yodav Araglav L'Trumas Hadeshin. Now we know Trumas Hadeshin occurs even before Alois HaShachar. So he came at the end of the graveyard shift, and the Kohen checked in for work that he was going to go to do the Trumas Hadeshin. So what did he do? He was Mekayel Yodav Araglav, and then he did Trumas Hadeshin. An hour later comes Alois HaShachar. Well, now the question is, will his Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim expire? The halach is l'machar, not literally the next day. It means when the day changes, meaning as soon as daybreak happens and the psolina sets in, einoi tzarech l'kadosh. He doesn't have to make Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim again. You know why? Shekvar Kiddush mitchilas avoda. An hour ago, before he did Trumas Hadeshin, he made Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. So, this brisa, this halacha that Rabbi Yochanan is stating, according to who is he stating it? According to Rebbe or according to Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon? Either Rebbe, if it's according to Rebbe, ha'amar pasla lina. Rebbe said, Alois HaShachar, the previous Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim expires. So how could Rabbi Yochanan say, Ein tzarech l'kadosh she'rakiddush mitchilas avoda? But that expired the moment Alois HaShachar occurred. And either Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon, and if we're going according to Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon, never mind if he made Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim an hour ago, even if he made it 3 days ago, as long as he didn't stop, it never expires. Either Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon, ha'amar ein tzarech l'kadosh afilu mikan v'ad asar yomim. So Rabbi Yochanan said as halacha, it doesn't seem to be consistent with Rebbe, nor does it seem to be consistent with Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon. Amar Abaye, I will tell you what Rabbi Yochanan meant. Lo'ilam l'Rebbe. He's referring to Rebbe. According to Rebbe, we have a kasha that as soon as Alois occurs, the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim expires. Zokt Gemara no v'lina derabbananti. It's not the din lina that Rebbe says applies to Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. It's not the raisa like on a murim that become postal that become noiser. No, it's only a derabbanan de kechumra that they said that the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim expires. So they said. They people, the same Rabbanan who said that it expires, said that if you just did Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim an hour ago to do the Trumas Hadeshin, which is the beginning of the Seder Avodah for the day Avodah, that won't be a problem. We only meant that there's a problem with Lina if you did Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim at the beginning of the night to do night Avodas. But your Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim was for day Avodas, starting with the Trumas Hadeshin, which is the first thing that's done in the morning. Therefore, there they didn't require another Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Umoidi, and their moida that mikrais hagever v'atzafra loy pasla lina. If the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim is from the night, but it's only from an hour ago, from krais hagever, it would not passel with lina. The type of krais hagever is either when the rooster crows, or it could mean there was a vecker in the base of Mikdash that woke the people up that were needed to do the early morning avodas. Rav Omar, no, lo'ilim Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon. Rabbi Yochanan was saying this klal in Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon. The problem is, according to Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon, you never ever need to do a second kiddush as long as you're still doing the avodah, as long as you're still in the base of Mikdash. But there it is, Rabbi Yochanan didn't completely pass like Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon, only partially. V'roi Rabbi Yochanan devar, Rabbi Yochanan only passed like Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon, b'tchilas avodah. That's only if the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim it only happened an hour ago, right before Alois, to do the Trumas Hadeshin. That's where he agrees with Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon. That's where he passes like Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon that you don't need another Kiddush and there's no Lina. But V'loi b'sayv avodah. But Rabbi Yochanan doesn't pass like Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon that a Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim from the evening before will last into tomorrow. About Meisvei. So frag the Gemara Akasha. We have another brisa. The kohen, the earliest kohen, he did Trumas Hadeshin. So he went up onto the Mizbeach with a silver shovel, and he shoveled some of the Deshen, and now he's coming down the Mizbeach to place it on the south side of the Mizbeach, on the southeast side of the Mizbeach. Meisvei, Ru Echab HaKohanim, Shoyorai. His friends, the Kohanim, saw him coming down. And they, the Gemara assumes, were in the Beis HaMikdash. They had been working the graveyard shift. They had been working through the night to be Makrei Emurim. And they saw, so that means they already made Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim the evening before. They see him coming down. So what did they do? They quickly mobilized. Miyaru v'Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim in Akir. They made another set of Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Question is, why would they need to make another Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? Turning on to Amud Beis. Bishlama la'Abaye. Bishlama, according to Abaye, the Mukim like Rebbe. He learned that Rabbi Yochanan was paskening like Rebbe, and he said that Rebbe said Lina is only midrabanon, and therefore, if you only did Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim an hour ago by Karais HaGever, it will not expire by Alois HaShachar. But Umoidi Rebbe de Mekrais HaGever Atzav Apostlina, it makes perfect sense here why the Kehanim that were working all night, why they do have to do another Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, because their Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim from the night before had already expired. Hamani Rebbe, Elul Rava, if you look like Rava, who learned in Rabbi Yochanan that according to Rebbe there's no Rabbanon, Lina is Lina, and no matter what, it has to be redone at Alois HaShachar. So this brisa can't be Rebbe, because according to Rebbe, even the guy who did Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim earlier before the Trumas Hadeshin, he would have to wash again. So it must be going according to Rabbi Shimon. El L'Rava the Mukim L'Akir Rabbi Shimon. Avol. I'm sorry. Hamani Rebbe. El L'Rava the Mukim L'Akir Rabbi Shimon. But the Rava who learns that Rabbi Yochanan is going according to Rabbi Shimon. Avol Rebbe. But according to Rebbe, Mikrais HaGever Atzafer Postlalina. Even if you just did Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim an hour ago, it's still possible, and you'd have to wash again. Hamani. Who is this brisa going to go according to? Rebbe Paslalina. According to Rebbe, even the kohen who just made an hour ago Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim to do the Trumas Hadeshin, he would have to make another Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. So the brisa Zikr can't be going according to that shita. And Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, but if you want to say it's going according to Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, Ha'amar afilu mikan v'dasar yomim einoi tzarich lekadesh. He said that you don't need to make Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim once you made one. So this brisa won't fit in according to anybody. Let's say this is going according to Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon. You were assuming that these Kohanim had made Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim in the evening because they were working their whole night. Lav davka. Maybe the Kohanim that we're talking about that were running to jump into action, maybe they were Kohanim that just signed on to their shift. And the reason why they're making Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim is because they're beginning their shift now. Gewaltig. So that takes us to this next Shiloh that we had. Once again, we weren't poishit the Shiloh that the Gemara asked. The Shiloh the Gemara had was Kiddush Yadav V'Raglav Trumas Hadeshin. Do you have to do it again? So, Rabbi Yochanan said that he doesn't have to do it again, and we don't know if the halacha is like Abaye and this is going according to Rebbe, or if the halacha is like Rava and this is going according to Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon. Now we have another Shiloh. Iboilahu Yitzia Mao Shatoil B'Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. The halacha is if you have meat of a carbon that leaves the azara, that meat is not possible. You cannot put it on the mizbeach. So what about someone who did Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? A kohen did Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, and he walked out of the Beis HaMikdash. He walked out of the azara. Would that now require that he should do a new Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim when he comes back in? Now Rashi learns the reason why it would be possible is kederach sheposhel b'chol hakodeshim shekitzu b'chlishareis shem yotzun nefsalom b'yotzei. It's just it doesn't have a din of kachim. Just like kachim are possible yotzei, Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim becomes possible yotzei. Im tim saloimer lina le pasla. If you're going to say that lina doesn't passel Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim like Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon says, that's the like parish. because he never left the Beis Hamikdash. He was in the Beis Hamikdash the whole time. But if he leaves the Beis Hamikdash, he leaves the confines of the Azara, the parish where he actually left the premises. Maybe Asuche Masach Daite. Maybe he was Mesiach Das, and therefore his Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim expired. Toshva Shver and Rashi, because Rashi learned it has nothing to do with Heschadas. It's about the psulina, like any piece of meat, like the psul yoytze, like any piece of meat that left the Beis Hamikdash would be possible. So Toshva learns that it's not stamadin yoytze, it's a shayla of Heschadas, because that's what the Gemara seems to say. Rashi needs a beer. Or maybe kibbud de biyode las or loy masach. Or yes, he left Azar, but there's nothing compelling him to leave the Azar. In a minute, he could turn around. As soon as he finishes his smoke break, he could turn right around and go back. Therefore, it wouldn't be considered a hefsek in the Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim. So that's we're talking about. Maybe we could bring a raya. Kiddush Yadav V'Raglam. A kohen did Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim. V'nitmu, and Rashi's hands became tamei, not as guf. No, every tumah daraisa, if he touches a sheretz, his whole guf becomes tamei. The only type of tumah that only his hands become tamei are tumah derabanan, and Rashi tells us two examples of such tumah. If a kohen touches noisar, or if a kohen touches pigel, only his hands become tamei. So what do you have to do to fix this? Matbilam, he needs to tovel his hands, but his Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim is not disqualified. Ve'ein tzarech lekadesh. But Yotzu, if he left the Beis Hamikdash, harayan biktu shasam, they remain kaddish. Meaning, even if he left the Beis Hamikdash, he doesn't have to do a new Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim. So that's Poshar Shayla. That Yitzia will not require a new Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim. Zok, you don't have a right from there. Our Shayla was if his whole body walks out of the Azara. This Bryce is only talking about if he stuck his hands out of the Azara. Yotzu Yodav Loikam Aboilot. We know if he just stuck his hands out of the Azara, he doesn't need Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim. Kikam Aboilot, our Shayla is Yotza Kol Gufo. He stepped out of the Azara. Would he require another Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim upon his return to the Beis Hamikdash? So Tashma, let's try on another raya. The Brisa says, Shaloi Rochat Yadayim V'Reglaim. A kohen did not do Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim, so what must he do? Either Mikadesh B'chlisharis B'fnim. His only option is to wash his hands and feet from a Klisharis that's in the Azara. Because the Torah says that the Kiyar has to be in the Azara. The Kiyar was a Klisharis, it's in the Azara, and that is the only type of vessel that you could make Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim with. But Kiddush B'chlisharis B'chutz. What if he washed his hands from a Klisharis, but it was not in the Beis HaMikdash, it wasn't in the Azara? That's not a good Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim. Or what if he used a regular keli, not a Klisharis, but it was in the Azara? Again, that wouldn't be valid. What if he toiled his whole body in a Mayra? The Avad and he did Avodah, Avodah Psula, his Avodah is possible because he didn't make a proper Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim. So Zok to Gemara, time of the Kiddush B'chlisharis B'chutz. The reason why we say it's not a good Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim, because the whole thing occurred B'chutz. So the only time that's not a good Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim, that's if the whole thing occurred B'chutz. But what if HaKiddush B'fnim, what if he made Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim B'fnim, V'yotza, and he went out afterwards? That will not disqualify. That will not disqualify the Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim. If you hold that walking out disqualifies, the Brisa should have said a bigger Kiddush. Even if you washed inside, but then you walked outside, it passes your Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim. Why pick a case where you only did a Kiddush outside, even if you did a Kiddush inside, but if you walked outside, it passes? Elamai, since the Brisa only picked a case where you did a Kiddush outside, it's a riot that if you did a Kiddush inside and you walked out, it wouldn't possible. So you have a clear raya that walking out of the Beis Hamikdash will not be mevatel your Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim. Zoktamar, you don't have a raya. Because Dilma Kiddush B'chlisharis B'chutz. Maybe the case of Kiddush B'chlisharis B'chutz is not in the case where his whole body was out. He remains inside the Azara. He just stuck his hands out to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim. So there you'll say, if he made the Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim B'chutz, it's going to be possible. But if he was standing inside and he made the Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim inside, and then afterwards he stuck his hand outside, there Avada, we concluded that it wouldn't require a new Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglaim. HaKiddush B'fnim V'yotza. the apik yodei levar, only his hands went out, sure, that would be kosher. That's the diak to make with this price. But if he walked completely out of the Azara, their tiboyalach, our shaila still remains unresolved. Let's see if we could resolve it from a different price. The kohen walked out of the Azara. If he went for a long time, then we say he was Mesiach Das, Ton Tvila. He will have to toivel because he might have become Tomei. But if he only went out for a brief moment, for a quick smoke break, then Ton Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. So this seems to be a Meforshah Brayso that says if a kohen walked out of the Azara, he has to, even if he was not Mesiach Das, he has to do a new Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. We're Poshar HaShayla. Amar Lo, your Papa said, no, you don't have a raya. When it says he went out Lepisha, Ton Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, he went out for a brief moment to go to the bathroom, either Lasach Raglav is Gedolim, or Luhatel Mayim, or to go number one, to go Ketanim. That's where he needs to make a new Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Frankly, more, that's not what the Brayso possibly could mean when it says Im Lefisha Ton Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Because that case of going to the bathroom is beferish mentioned later in the Brayso. So if it's beferish mentioned later in the Brayso, this earlier case cannot be referring to that case. So tomorrow, no, could tell me that. Tani Vadim Afarish. First, the Brayso said in general terms, Vim Lefi Shah Ton Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, and then the Brayso explains, what do I mean by Lefi Shah? I mean that he went out to do Meir Aglayim. Rashi explains why he would need Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. The reason why he would need it is because it's inevitable that there will be some spray on his feet. Now, if someone has spray of urine on his feet, people could look at him and think that he's got a serious plumbing problem that would actually make him also lovay bekal. So therefore, he's going to wipe it off. Now that he's going to wipe off urine from his feet, now he for sure needs a new Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Tashma, so we still have an unresolved shaila. If a kohen leaves the Beis Hamikdash for a short amount of time, does he need to make a new Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? So Tashma from Parah. The Parah Aduma, we know that all of the avoid of the Parah Aduma was not done in the Beis Hamikdash. It was done by Har HaZeisim. Before the kohen did this whole process of the Parah Aduma, he would be Mekadesh B'chlisharis B'fnim. He would first do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim in the Beis Hamikdash in the Azara, and then then he would go out to Har HaZeisim to process the carbon. Rabbi Yochanan said, Afilu b'chutz, you don't have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim inside the Beis Hamikdash, you can do it outside. I mean, the whole shkita, the whole process is outside. Afilu b'klichoyel, afilu b'mekida shel cheres, even a kli cheres which wouldn't ever even be royu to be a kli sharis. So you have a raya from here that even though they did the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim and he left the Beis Hamikdash, you see it's still valid. The haraya, it's working for the Parah Aduma. Amar Papa Avada doesn't work. Avada expires. I Parah Aduma, shiny Parah hoil v'chol ma'aseh b'chutz le'pasel bo yitzia. Normally, if you walk out of the Beis Hamikdash after Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, of course, and you cannot do any more hakravas karbonos. You have to do another Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. But the Parah Aduma is different because the whole avodah is done outside. So for the Parah Aduma, the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim would work. So if that's the case, why do you need to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim in the Azara? Do it outside. Anyway, the whole thing is done outside. We want to make it look like the avodas pnim. So we want the prep to be the same prep that you would have for bringing a carbon, even though in fact this is not a carbon at all. As a matter of fact, we know that a Parah Aduma is called Kedushay by the Kabbayis. It's not even the Kedushay Zaguf. The Gemara closes a Shaila. So we did not resolve the Shaila of if a kohen leaves the Azara, if he needs a new Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. It remains unresolved. I think that's the third Shaila we had. Now we have another Shaila. Iboilu Tuma Mao Shatoil L'Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Let's just do a tally of how many Shailas we had. The first Shaila we had was, according to Rabbi Eliezer, will there be a psolino on the Me'akir? The second Shaila we had, Rabbi Yochanan, was in Rabbi Yochanan. Is Rabbi Yochanan going according to Rav or Abaye? Is he going in Rebbe or is he going in Abelazar B'Shimon? The third Shaila we had was Yitzia, and now we're up to the fourth Shaila of Tumah. Tumah Ma'usha Toyla Kiddush Yadayim Reglaim. What happens if a Kohen did Kiddush Yadayim Reglaim, and then he became Tomei? Now we're going to assume it means Dafka his hands became Tomei and not his whole goof. So his hands became Tomei. Will that cancel out his Kiddush Yadayim Reglaim? After he toils his hands, does he have to make a new Kiddush Yadayim Reglaim? If you're going to leaving the Beit Shemikdash doesn't passel, which is one side of the Shaila we just had a moment ago, that's because the Gavra Chazi, he himself is royal to bring a carbon, he just is out of the Beit Shemikdash. But if his hands became Tameh, the Gavra Chazi, at this point he's not even royal to bring a carbon until he toivels his hands. So maybe during that period of time where he's not royal to bring a carbon, maybe Asuche Masech Daite, he's Masiach Das, and therefore he will require a new Kiddush Yadayim Reglaim. Or maybe not. Even the Hadar Chazi, since in that flash he could make himself be royal to be Makar Karbanis again, merely by toiveling his hands with no delay, Dokla, he stays focused, Masech Daite, and he will not be Masiach Das, and therefore he should not require another Kiddush Yadayim Reglaim. Dr. Martashima from a Brisa that we're quite familiar with. Kiddush Yodav Araglav v'nitmu. If he was Mekadosh Yodav Araglav, then he became Tamei. Matbila nitoivos then. Ve'in tzarech lekadosh. So you see clearly the answer to our shaila, that if his hands became Tamei, he does not need a new Kiddush Yadayim V'raglayim. Zakmo, you're right. Nitmu Yodav lo miboila. You push it our shaila if it was only Nitmu Yodav. It says Beferish, Ein tzarech lekadosh. But our shaila is kimi boilon of Nitma kol gufay. We want to know, what if he touched the sheretz and now he became a rishon l'tumah? His whole goof is tummy. Now he needs tevilah and harav shemesh. Now we want to know if he would need another kiddush yadayim raglaim when he comes back to the Beis Hamikdash. So Dr. Gemara, why is that a shayla? Whole gufa, for sure he'll need a new kiddush yadayim raglaim, because typically even the boy lemevet harav shemesh. Now even if he toivels, he's still tummy. He's got to wait until the evening. This might have happened at 11 o'clock in the morning. He's gonna have to wait all day. That's an extended period of time where he's not going to be able to do avodah. For sure, asuche masech daite. For sure, he'll need a new kiddush yadayim reglaim. So tomorrow, that's not my shaila. My shaila could go into itmi samech l'shkiyas acham. What if he became tamei b'sheretz 5 minutes before shkia? He jumps into the mikveh, and then 2 minutes later he becomes tar because it's harav shemesh. There, the question is, would he have to do kiddush yadayim reglaim to continue doing avodah, or not, because he wasn't Masiach Das, because he was only Tomei for a very brief period. Tashma, so the Gemara brings right from another brisa that we're very familiar with. Part of the Paraduma. Rabbi Yosef Amar, Mekadosh b'chlisharis b'fnim v'yotzei. Rabbi Yochanan afilu b'chutz, v'afilu b'chaychayel, v'afilu b'mekidosh al-cheres. The Paraduma, we know there was halacha that they made sure that the kohen that did the process of the Paraduma, they made him Tomei with the sheretz. Mamash Ar Shaila became Tomei. Yet we still see his kiddush yadayim v'raglayim is good. Zok the Gemara now on Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. V'hapara the temuyim mitaminale. We bedaf can make him tamei with the sheretz. The Tan we learned mitamin hayu akoyin asoyer for sapara. They would bedaf can make him tamei umatbil noisoi, and then they would toivel him to be mitayir him. Now he's at full yoim. Why in the world would they do that? Lahoitzi mi libon shel tzedaikim, to show the tzedaikim that they're wrong. The Tzedaikim held that Tvul Yoim could not process a paraduma. You had to wait for Shemesh. So they bedafka only used the coin who was a Tvul Yoim. And if they couldn't find the coin who was a Tvul Yoim, they made him tummy with a sheretz and they made him go to the mikveh. They made it Tvul Yoim bedafka. So you see he was tummy, yet he doesn't have to do another Kiddush Yadayim V'raglayim. Shema minalei paslaba. You see that even though the coin became tummy, his kiddush yadayim v'raglayim is still valid. So you want to bring a raya in a regular case of a kohen in the Beis Hamikdash, not by the paraduma. If he became tamei, it would not invalidate his kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. So you can't bring me raya from paraduma. Shiny para hoyld it's full yoim. Now here Rashi changes the girsa. Rashi says yesh chisarim b'sfarim v'nearly a girsa haki. Rashi tells us this is the girsa. Shiny para hoyld it's full yoim kashaba. You know why we're makel that the Kiddush Yadayim V'raglayim doesn't expire? Because you even allow a Tful Yoim to process a Paraduma. So therefore, therefore, the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim wouldn't passel, the Tumah wouldn't passel the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim because it doesn't even passel him from doing the Avodah. The Makalish, if you're telling me normally it wouldn't work, and only by Paraduma it will work, why do you do it B'chlal? Why do you do B'chlal? Teretz is because we still want the prep to look like an avodah, so we tell him to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim before, even though we make him tamei, which would typically be mevatel the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, but we still want the process to be at least similar to the flow of the avodah for a regular carbon. So Baruch Hashem, we didn't pass on our shayla. We still have a suffix. The kohen becomes tamei right before nightfall, and he quickly goes to the mikveh, and then he has harav shemesh. Would he need to make a new Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? And again, that remains unresolved. Baruch Hashem, we were to finish Daf Chaf, and Be'ez Hashem tomorrow at 7 and at 9, we're going to learn Daf Chaf Aleph in Zevachim. Everybody should have gebenched the Zisa Geshmak Avach. You should all finish your sukkahs and your decorations and buying your arbaminim, and we should have a Zisa year.
Amen. Amen. Amen.